Paul, if you want to find that unmute button, etc., we will welcome you to our stage here. And Paul, I will let you introduce yourself. Thank you so much. Round of applause.
Thank you, Sarah, for that, and thank you for that kind introduction. Let me just find my presentation. There we go.
So while Paul is just sharing his presentation, so Paul is the Chief Scientific Advisor to BEIS, which is in the UK, our main government department that deals with all things business, industry, etc. Paul is the fabulous facilitator, or basically the person pulling together a lot of the information, or helping to pull together a lot of the information that will be going into the UK's mineral strategy. So great, we can see your slides now, Paul, in the PowerPoint format.
Yes, I'm having that classical window problem, aren't I? I've not chosen the right window somehow. Let me just
it's okay.
And try again.
It's all good. So some of the people who we've had speaking this week.
Right, super.
There we go.
There,
fabulous. Everybody put your hands together for the fabulous Paul Monks.
Thank you. That's an introduction that I've now got to follow. Thank you very much, Sarah, for that. So for those, Sarah was just saying, I'm Paul Monks. I'm the Chief Scientific Advisor at the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. And I'll get to what Sarah was talking about in a few moments' time. So I'm just going to give you the journey that we've been on in terms of thinking around the challenges of net zero and critical minerals as part of our activities. That's, of course, if I can actually change my slide, which is the next challenge. There we go, super. So our framing for this and our entry point for this was thinking about net zero. So in the UK context, that was in 2008, we were the first country, one of the first countries in the world to bring in legislation to decrease our greenhouse gas emissions by then 80% of 1990 levels by 2050. And lastly, quite recently in 2019, we upped that ambition to 100% by 1990 levels, and we call that net zero. The way that we do that is through a series of climate budgets, and we just set the last one, Carbon Budget 6, which is our goal for the statutory goal for the mid-2030s, midpoint of 2035, which was a 78% reduction compared to 1990 levels. And that rolls up one level to the COP process and the nationally determined contribution, and is actually our contribution to the COP26 goal as part of that. Just very briefly before we kind of get into that, and I segue into critical minerals from that, how do you achieve that? Well, and this is taken from the Climate Change Committee's work, who are the body that hold the government to account around the goals that they've set for decarbonisation. You reduce demand and improve efficiency, very, very important. Must remember at all times, if you don't have to create it, you don't have to decarbonise it. If you can use it more efficiently, you have to create less of it. But actually, there's a whole bunch of low carbon solutions, which include electrification, hydrogen, CCS and the like, as well as large amounts of low carbon energy and land use sectors as well that are part of that. And this, in a way, and this transition, which is on the right-hand side here, provides the backdrop, if you will, for thinking a little bit about critical minerals and their availability in that transition. Before I jump into that, I just want to make one larger point around this. This is a systems problem. This is a systems problem. So on this slide, I've got the energy transition. On the left-hand side, the energy sources, gas, electricity, oil and petroleum. On the right-hand side, I've got some usage sectors, and you can see kind of a spaghetti diagram there. So we've got that transition. So we've got that system and that systems thinking that we need around that. But that system also sits in a financial system that has to facilitate that as well. And it also sits in a consumer behavior and behavior change system, because it's people that use technology, it's people that use energy, and that's got to be in there as well. But it also sits in this supply side economic transition bit as well, and the supplies and changing patterns of that system and supplies within that system that is important. So not only is this a systems problem, this is a systems problem, and in reality it's a systems problem, because I've described it in the UK context, but that also sits in a global energy transition context and a global economic transition context as well. So you've got the system itself, that interacts with the financial and consumer behaviors, that systems of systems, but it's also a global problem. It's a system of systems problem. I probably actually can go to 6 if I stretch it, but I'm not going to, because it just ends up with me saying system of systems very quickly. So I think that that's the landscape that we're working on, and actually critical minerals and materials in that transition, the changing shape of that, is actually a really important feature of thinking towards the future. And there are some key technologies in future technologies. I could talk about solar and renewables now and what they need, but CCS, hydrogen, GGR technology, greenhouse gas removal technology is also going to be that, biomass and conventional burning technologies as well. So just to say that we're, in a way, we're thinking of that, and we're thinking about the materials we're going to need in order to do that. And that, in a way, brings us to the subject of what you've been talking about and some of the aspects of that. And that brings us quite nicely to critical minerals. There's a nice Lord Sedwell quote, who's former Cabinet Secretary here in the UK. Critical minerals, semiconductors and data are the oil, steel and electricity of the 21st century. I think it's pointing to, in some senses, the challenge of the transition in a way, and how these things are going to be absolutely critical as part of this. So, I mean, in a way, it's a whole economy issue, and it's going to be essential for any country's security and economic prosperity as part of that. And without that, we're not going to be able to achieve net zero, which is part of that key transition to decarbonising the world. And on the right hand side is a criticality assessment. There are plenty of them around. The European Union, the US have all done them, that look at supply and economic vulnerability in some sense in this, and the different minerals as matched around this. And as I said, I chair a group with Sarah and a number of other people around this. We've pulled this problem apart a little bit, and it's not just a supply side problem, it's a systems problem, like the net zero transition. Few of these minerals are used on their own. They're used in combination. They're geographically spread. They've got complex supply chains and delays in them. So it's a really interesting high dimensionality issue as part of this. And again, it's quite clear actually where the challenge lies in this net zero framework. If you look at transport, a conventional car has about 75 kilograms per vehicle of minerals, where an electric car has in excess of 200 kilograms per vehicle. And you can already see from the colours of the graph here, some of these minerals, the diversity of that. You then also think about the renewables and the low carbon power generation that we're going to need. Offshore wind, has in excess of 15,000 kilograms per megawatt. Of minerals required. Solar PV, again, very different, about 7,500 kilograms per megawatt. So there's a very, the critical minerals are going to be incredibly important in that clean energy transition. And I'm probably not telling this audience anything they don't really know. But this is the big context of the issue now, and I'll issue the challenge that comes from this sort of thinking, a little bit in a few seconds, and I'll open for questions. And those demands are not going to get smaller; they're going to get bigger in the future. And we've seen the volatility in some of the mineral in some of the mineral markets recently, around that, with lithium increasing very heavily. And you can see there's going to be a great demand, on whatever scenario, up to, in some senses, predicted to be 4 times the demand of today, if not more, with a very changing pattern as well of that usage, depending on what you believe the technology portfolio is going to look like in the future. The demand on that technology portfolio will be, will we develop out of criticality? Yes, we will. Will we develop quickly enough? Who knows? I think that's an interesting question to debate. So what did the UK government do as part of our net zero strategy that we put up around COP26? We made a few commitments. One was that we're putting a critical minerals strategy together with a few people who are on this call. We've convened a critical minerals expert group, as you've already heard, to help us advise on that. And we'll be launching shortly a critical minerals intelligence centre, because one of these things is that this is a dynamic, not a static problem. You can't say it's not set and forget strategy time. I mean, that criticality assessment that I already showed you, which is a little over a year old, is already out of date. Things geopolitically, things have changed, supply chains have changed, COVID has changed. It's no longer, if you took a picture of it, it's useless, because in fact it's all changed. Yeah, so that dynamic nature of the problem is absolutely critical to do that. So the question is, what can you actually do? And I think, I think the challenge that I would lay out to anybody, I'm a scientist supporting, the policy development here within the UK government. And the question I ask anybody when they tell me, I know what the problem statement is, I've just told you the problem statement. I think everybody on this call knows the problem statement. The question is, what should governments be doing, and what should the UK government be doing? And we've split it into these sort of buckets to think about what can we do domestically. What are the potentials in the circular economy around that? There's clearly an international context to this, with both trade agreements and collaboration. This conference is very much about ESG and the just transition as part of that, holding up those standards, supporting that just transition, and using standards to drive changes in mining and mineral extraction and refine the whole supply chain, the whole value chain, is actually quite important. This is a sector that will be enabled digitally. Back to semiconductors, data and critical minerals. Data and digital is a very important part of this as well as potentially thinking about international context and things that are new. So this is a very high level framing of, in some senses, of what we're looking to think about in the critical minerals strategy, and we welcome discourse and ideas and conversation about how to form that into a proper set of options to deliver outcomes, and not another problem statement on critical minerals. So that's my very, very brief talk. I think Sarah, you want to give some time for some sort of questions. Here are my 3 take-home messages. Net zero is a really pervasive challenge. It actually runs through everything that we do. You need that systems approach to think about it. You need to incorporate that behavior change as part of it as people, but also you've got to think about that change being sustainable and that change being resilient. So it is a systems approach that is sustainable, resilient. Critical minerals are a key element, and the UK government is keen to think about how it can work with industry and other stakeholders across the piece. I've just written the word industry here as a coverall to think about, what is the role of government in this? What is the solution space that we can work with people in? I'm a science advisor, so I tend to look at it through the science lens, which is an important element of this, but clearly not all of it. So thank you very much, and if you're interested, you can also follow me on Twitter, where I sometimes tweet about critical minerals. It's my personal KPI as CSA is to get more Twitter followers. I'm not doing very well, but nonetheless, thank you, Sarah. Hopefully we can that was useful and can stimulate some questions from the audience or your panel.
Fantastic. Thank you very, very much, Paul. Everybody, please, round of applause for the fabulous Paul Buggs. And now go and make sure you find him on Twitter, just so that we can help you with that KPI there, Paul.
Really a personal KPI.
Excellent. So Paul, just with that, and I've got there are a number of questions that are coming in right this second. So one of them talks straight to the deep sea mining that, of course, was in that last column with regards to sort of kind of part of the framework with regards to the strategy that's being put together. There's been quite a lot of discussion about deep sea mining in this forum over the course of the last week. I don't know if you want to say anything more about that.
Well, I mean, I think we're interested in trying to understand from a scientific basis. I'm interested to understand what the risks, what the opportunities are, what the risks are. And I think one of the challenges often, in this minerals area in general, what are the governance structures that can protect that, particularly in the international domain? So I think that's one of the clear challenges that are coming out here. How can we build the sort of frameworks that help us understand the risks and opportunities around that, and not become overwhelmed, particularly in the international context, by just people, in inverted commas, just doing it, close inverted commas, and we end up with the same problems that we've generated historically in the mining industry, now repeated on the seabed. That would be my take on it.
Fantastic. Thank you for that, Paul. And then I guess building on that and bringing in your systems of a systems, I think, well, systems to the power of 6, I think was where we were going with that, just to cheat on that particular tongue twister. So as the person who has been corralling these people, or basically the expert advisory committee that's been feeding into the strategy and everything. And you've done a fantastic job of corralling lots of people with very different ideas. Do you want to just sort of comment on that process and just the sheer magnitude of the different perspectives, the different disciplines, the different aspects that need to come together?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting sort of question. Because I mean, I think when you start off on the critical minerals journey, in inverted commas, you think it's all about primary production and mining, close inverted commas. I think, you know, I mean, there'll be many people on this call going, yeah, that's a really obvious comment, you know, because, you know, but it isn't to people who are external. You know, it looks like a primary production problem, but it isn't a primary production problem, as you well know. You know, it's one that crosses the whole of the value chain. And then, you know, on it are ESG type considerations as well. And I think mapping out that interconnections, you know, so if I've got a systems problem with my energy transition, there's a systems problem in the way that we use minerals, you know, and the supply chain and where that's owned and how we value that, as well as the environmental pressures that are being put on mineral extraction in different countries and different geographies. So actually, you realise that it's not a problem that can be solved even by just pumping cash in it. So actually, this is not a sector, frankly, that is cash poor. I mean, it is actually well financed, and there's quite a lot of money to finance it. So distinct from many other sectors, you know, it's not one that goes out and asks for a lot of money, and that's an interesting an interesting sort of context in this as well. So I think corralling the range of understanding, from the academic understanding to the major mineral extractors, to the ESG, to the just transition, to the national and regional and international context of this, to many people that work cross jurisdiction, across the whole value chain of extraction, refining, supply, recycle, gives you that kind of very large landscape in which you have to work this system, which is also then interfaced with the industrial system it feeds as well. And you know, one of the things that I often wonder is whether the net zero challenge will lead to greater vertical integration in that system, which is in some senses not a particularly well integrated system at the moment.
So Paul, just with that as well, then you mentioned that the sector is cash rich, or there's lots of money in it, but and obviously, I mean, with regards to the UK, we are a finance hub for lots of minerals and mining around the world, but an awful lot of that finance is going to gold rather than, say, the critical minerals and materials. I don't know if you've done that split, and if there's anything within that, because of course finance wasn't a discrete bucket within that slide that you showed us at the moment.
I think it's one of the areas that we're currently exploring, actually, to think a little bit about how that sector is financed. I mean, you would wonder, wouldn't you, with some of the prices that's gone up recently in the London Metal Exchange around some of the metals, you know, around the lithium pricing recently, which is, you know, increased, you know, substantially, whether, you know, and that looks to be the long-term maintenance. You look at any of the mineral predictions, there's going to be, you know, there's not going to be enough supply to meet the demand, and that's, you know, it's economics 101, what happens at that sort of stage as well. So I think there's an interesting question about whether the investment will then follow what is clearly going to be a growth market for a number of years. And there's some very interesting contradictions. You know, a lot of this is not sometimes about primary production, it's about the time it takes to put in a refinery capability, you know, which has, you know, a capital and a time lag to meet a demand. You know, so we know in the UK, you know, what we're predicting, the sort of battery usage that we're going to need by 2030, and you can work that all the way back down the supply chain to the raw materials that you're going to need to do that, and it's substantial, and we're not the only ones doing that. Of course, it's been done globally, so you can see that. So back to the finance question, I think you'll see the money follow the market, won't you? To where that's what, you know, I'm not, again, an economist, I'm a scientist, but one would imagine that's the way that it works.
Great.
Maybe
Thanks,
somebody who knows more about it could tell us.
Stuart, you've had your hand up. Do you want to come in?
Yeah, I think I also find it fascinating, this whole conversation of what is the critical mineral. And I realize I'm about to sound like an apologist for the coal industry, and I'm not, but I'll say it anyway. As we go into this next evolution of of society and how we change the way we look at energy. You think about a windmill, one of these huge windmills, how much steel is involved in building that windmill? Yes, there's a ton of rare earths in it as well, lots of copper, but a lot of steel. And where's that steel going to come from? So coming back to Pauline's comment, if we think about systems and systems and systems, if we are constantly pushing some of these dirty industries that we need into other places, are we really true to what we're trying to achieve? Or actually accepting that the UK needs steel-making coal to make steel, why not have a steel-making coal mine in the UK rather than pushing it somewhere else, in someone else's back garden? So I think it's understanding this is not just about the sexy elements at the bottom of the periodic table. There are a whole bunch of things that are really important here that we need to build this next cultural journey we're on.
Yeah, and that's a really good point, Stuart. And in a way, yeah, I when I write all my documents, I write CM, which I interchangeably use for critical minerals and critical materials. And the point that you make is that virtual materials are critical to this. I mean, I think on the steel question in particular, my view is there's a great pressure to decarbonize that industry. It's one of the most difficult to decarbonize industries. There are now production plants at decent scale coming on that are producing green steel. You know, I see hydrogen, you know, and hydrogen-based technologies, you know, beginning to replace, you know, not quite at the scale that's required yet, coal. I think you'll see steel decarbonize. It is a challenge, undoubtedly, but I think that the pressure not to then say, well, actually, we need the steel. It's part of the critical transition. It can hold it up. Let's stop decarbonizing. Let's stop decarbonizing steel because we need it. In my mind, is the wrong. I don't think that's what you suggested, by the way. I don't think it's the right argument. The pressure has to be kept up on steel in order to decarbonize. And I think the offshoring of emissions is interesting. I mean, that's a big push in the COP process under the Scope 3 emissions to stop that offshoring of emissions. And that comes then to emission trading schemes, and the role of emission trading schemes are putting the pressure on the carbon price to stop the offshoring of that. And if you import high carbon steel, high carbon embedded steel, you pay the price for it. So the pressure is there to use the decarbonized product. So I do see the dial being changed. I think the question is how quickly. The G7 has decarbonization of steel as one of its key goals, you know, across that partnership, and that was pushed very heavily at COP26 as well. So I see the argument I would use is, you know, let's not take our foot off the pedal on this. We're going to need to decarbonize it. It's such a critical building material. Let's make sure that the markets respond to that need for decarbonization that drives the industrial change that's going to be required. But I work on the more sciencey side of stuff, which is sometimes I don't want to come across as too idealistic.
Well, totally agree. We need to move away from coal. Blue hydrogen would be wonderful when it comes. Or green hydrogen.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. Paul, I know that you need to go. Do you have time for one more question, or do you need
time for one more question? Yes.
Excellent. So Miguel, I just wanted to pull you in on this. So coming from Peru, and so therefore one of the main producers of copper. And so therefore, I mean, do you have any thoughts just to share with Paul as a country that is one of those producers selling that copper to, say, the UK, for the UK to then do something with? Do you have any comments with regards to some of what Paul has said? Are there any things you'd like the UK to do for you?
No, yes, I think that the copper is very important in the next new transition of the energy in the world, no? And in the case of Peru, now have a portfolio of projects. 60% of this is in relation to copper, no? And obviously we need to work very hard to make this project and generate the opportunity to give all the world the copper. But the other point is around to the possibility to reduction of the CO2 in the not in the operation, in the sourcing, in the the sourcing that is necessary for the operation mine. No? We participate in one study of the International Development Bank, for example, that defined that the scope 3 of the mining operation in South America, in Chile, Peru, and Colombia, is very challenges that we need to work in this reduction of CO2 and the possibility, for example, that the authorities promoting that the companies to report in this. No? The big challenge is how the companies report. The scope 1 and scope 2 is now the companies work very hard, you know, because scope 1 is in the operation, and scope 2 is the energy and some products that we need to operation, but the scope 3 is the suppliers. No? And the suppliers is a big group that we need to work very hard to reduce the emission of CO2. No? And the other topic that is very important in this matter is the neo-sharing. No? How to obtain the products for the operation near of the mines. No? And this is very interesting in my opinion, because the idea is how to obtain the products near of the mines, probably generate opportunity in the countries to build in this product in the countries. No? And we existed the possibility that working very hard in the new equipment, no? the artificial miners, no? The mining 4.0, no? That now mentioned this is that we need electro equipment. We need a mining circular, for example. Now topic about the circular economy, but why not talk about the circular miner, no? Mining. It's very interesting, the topic. No, I think that we need to work very hard. We need to promote that the authorities in this country, in Chile, Peru, and in other countries, implementing the incentives that the companies reporting and working very hard with the suppliers to reduce these emissions.
I mean, I think that's really interesting, Miguel. I think the whole, you know, looking at the scope 3 emissions, I think that the thing that you said about it creating jobs as well, I think the green transition creates jobs as it changes supply chains and makes it more indigenous, and you understand where the carbon is in that supply chain. And I think people are going to, you know, I said digital is a great enabler in this, you know, I'm going to use the blockchain word, but, you know, I think we will be tracking through both the minerals and their sources and where, but I think we'll also be looking at where the emissions are embedded and passing that along as well. And I think there's great opportunity for many countries in the green transition about upping the skilled economy to meet the demands of decarbonising locally rather than more globally. So I think, yeah, mining 4.0 and embracing some of the elements of industry 4.0 definitely is a way towards that in this sort of area. So I think that's a very kind of upbeat message to think about it, because, you know, mining and minerals are going to be a critical part of the decarbonisation, and I think, you know, there's again a little bit sometimes where people want to bury their heads in the sand about that, and it's which is another mineral to do. But I think we should avoid that absolutely.
So before Paul buries him too deep in that sand, thank you so much, Paul. Absolutely brilliant as always. Thank you very much. Round of applause.
Thank you very much, Darren. Cheers.
Brilliant. Thank you.